It's 4 o'clock.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Hey, welcome all to this. Is the first official live stream Dhamma talk from Arrow River. Seems to be working okay. You can let me know in the chat if there's any audio problems. Otherwise, I'd request that you refrain from asking questions till the end of the talk. And I'll in the same situation at this strange moment in samsara. There's a lot of what's happening right now that should illustrate principles of Dhamma that people have in society. People have avoided looking at the realities of birth, old age, sickness, and death, and now it's kind of being put in their face. The one thing we all know for certain is that we're all going to die. Maybe some of us will die from COVID-19, but the rest of us will die from something else. We don't know the time of our death, the place of our death, or the means of our death, but we know we're going to die. That's the one thing that's certain. And the Buddha said we should reflect on that often, the nature of the impermanence of the human condition, that we have at best a few decades of existence in this human form, and the human form is a very precious rebirth, and we should cherish it and make good use of it. Human form means you've already won a big lottery. The rarity of taking human rebirth has been compared to the blind tortoise at the bottom of the ocean. It surfaces once every 100 years, and if he puts his head through a yoke, that's your chance, once having fallen into the lower realms, of taking human rebirth. The human rebirth has this advantage that there is a mixture of pleasure and pain. Those beings in the lower realms are overwhelmed with suffering to such a degree that they don't have any psychic space to move. The beings in the higher realms, like the Devas, are so immersed in constant pleasure that they become heedless. They don't see that there could be any possible thing to be concerned about. But humans are in a unique position in that we do have the realities of samsara presented to us very clearly. We can't escape them. Every one of us is subject to birth, sickness, old age, and death. Every one of us experiences loss and grief in the course of our life. And as you get older, you'll see more and more people that you love, people that are close to you, pass away. And the reality of the impermanence of human life becomes unavoidable. What we also have in the human life, for most humans at most of the time, we have enough ease and comfort and periods of well-being that we have space we have the psychic space and the energy to be able to practice the Dhamma if we have any wisdom at all. And it behooves us to look at the reality of uh, human condition, of the existential dilemma of being caught between birth and death, and to see it clearly for what it is, and to seek the remedy for it, which is the Dhamma. The Buddha, in the classical story of the early life of the Buddha, before he became the Buddha, when he was the prince, the Bodhisattva, it said that he encountered, when he was enjoying himself on a chariot ride, he encountered, and on different occasions, a sick man, an old man, a dead man, and then a samana, a robed ascetic. And they did not allow him to become heedless. And Siddhartha Gautama was a very unusual, unique individual. He was the Bodhisattva. He'd already been through hundreds of lifetimes. Again and again in his mind, how is it that human beings are subject to this, and how can we transcend that condition? And that became the quest that he set forth on. And this is what the Zen people call the great matter, or the great question, the question of birth and death. We're all of us subject to birth, and we're all of us subject to death. And the Buddha sought a way out of that, a way to transcend that, in the realization of nibbana, the unconditioned. One of the most succinct formulas in the Pali Canon for the way to realize nibbana occurs in the Sutta Nipata, where Mogaraja, the Brahmin student, asks the Buddha the question, how can I escape the gaze of the Lord of Death? And the Buddha answered with three clauses, or three statements. He said, be ever mindful, Mogaraja. That's the first one. Second one, see the world as empty. And the third one, abandon thoughts of self. So being ever mindful, this is having the quality of sati. And this is a word, a Pali word that has been translated as mindfulness. And there's some issue with that translation. I know one senior monk who does some translation work tells me that he's decided not to use the word mindfulness anymore in his writings or teachings, because it's been so sort of boulderized in the general culture. There's mindfulness of this and mindfulness of that, and it no longer has the original meaning. The word sati is actually very tied up with the idea of memory. And that seems odd when you first hear that, if you're used to the common way it's presented is be in the present moment, be here now. And there's some relevance to that. That's not entirely wrong. But it's not the whole picture. Sati is the Pali equivalent of the Sanskrit word smriti, which directly means memory. And in the Pali texts, when someone is being praised for being very mindful or having good sati, the phrase is often given, uh, he is mindful, or he has sati. He easily remembers that which was said and done long ago. Some of the older translations for sati use the word recollectedness. It's kind of an awkward tongue twister of a word, but it's probably closer to the literal meaning of the word. Sati is, I like to say, is remembering to be present. Remembering remembering the present moment, having it in mind in such a way. Now, this is another way of explaining this, from Abhidhamma. There's a one of the moments in the cognitive series in Abhidhamma is Tadaramana, which is usually translated as registration. It's when you've taken an object with the mind and you've gone through the whole series, the cognitive series, then towards the end, there's this moment that's called Tadaramana, registration, which means you've really seen it and now you put it away. It's registered. Kind of person who's always hunting around, where did I put my car keys, or where did I put my pen? That's that reason for that is because when you put it down, you weren't being mindful. You didn't have enough sati present in the mind to take the cognitive process all the way to Tadaramana. If you put your keys down mindfully, you don't have to make an effort to try and remember where you put them. You've registered it. You don't have to think about it. It's just there. And when the time comes that you're looking for your keys, oh, there they are. Yeah, I put them there. There's no problem. So when you're mindful, that means you're real. You can see this in meditation. If your mind wanders away in meditation and you're daydreaming or you're lost in some fantasy or some recollection, and then it comes back to your object, there's a very clear moment of waking up. Oh, yeah, I'm supposed to be watching my breath. And that's recollectedness. You're recollecting what you're supposed to be doing. So sati. And it's a very clear, sharp moment. Something a lot of teachers emphasize is the importance of that moment. At that moment, not to be chastising yourself because you wandered off, but to be joyful that you've come back. You're here, oh yeah, okay, now you're awake and you know what you're doing. So sati, recollectedness, is something that is the first principle that the Buddha gave to Mogaraja. Be ever mindful, to be present. Be present with reality at this moment, at every moment. And see the world as empty and abandon thoughts of self. These are two expressions regarding the principle of sunyata, or emptiness, voidness, which is a really core basic teaching of Buddhism. It's the teaching unique to the Buddhas. It's really the most unique. You'd almost use it as a diagnostic for examining Indian schools of thought and philosophies. If they have the principle of sunyata, of emptiness, then they're Buddhist. If they don't, they're something else. And these are two sides of it. see the world as empty and abandon thoughts of self. So it's the external and the internal, and empty both ways. Seeing the world as empty means uh, perceiving this characteristic of sunya, of emptiness, in all phenomena. That this is a very elusive philosophical concept when you first approach it. It means that nothing that exists has an inherent self substance, nothing has an essence. A phrase from Tibetan Buddhism that I'm quite enamored of, expressing this, is nothing exists from its own side. Nothing exists from its own side. Everything that exists is only a reflection, a momentary intersection of this is emptiness related to the concept of conditionality, conditioned arising. When everything is truly conditioned, absolutely a result of other phenomena, it has no independent existence, and it's essentially empty. And those things it's dependent on, those causes and conditions, those themselves are also empty, and they're also subject to cause and condition. And there's nowhere in it where you can find anything you can pin down and say, this is something substantial, this is lasting, this is real, it has an inherent independent reality. There's a word, a philosophical concept in Indian thought, uh, what's called svabhava, which means own being or own essence. And it's very parallel to an idea from Greek philosophy, as from Aristotle, that things have a reality on two levels. They have an essence and qualities. So you have an essence of something, and then it will be colored or flavored by various qualities, such as being large or being small or being red or being blue. Whatever these are qualities, but there's something underlying it that's a real essence. Whereas a Buddhist philosophy did away with swabhava altogether. There's only a play of these different qualities with no underlying substance that they adhere to. The swabhava itself is non-existent. If you think about it enough, you'll see that the idea of an essence in the Aristotelian sense or swabhava in the Indian sense, pretty much the same thing, is really an unnecessary concept. You can't, even if it existed, you could never get at it. All you ever deal with are the qualities, characteristics that are always in flux, always changing, and only exist according to causes and conditions. And that's really all there is, a flux of causes and conditions. There's no inherent substance in anything. And this may seem all very abstract, but an important implication of this is that there is nothing in the world, no objective phenomena that we can rely on or count on as being solid or permanent or abiding. that everything is constantly falling away, disintegrating, in flux, and new things are springing into existence and replacing them. And there's nothing you can rely on as being solid or secure or stable. And understanding that truth is something that can serve us in good stead in times of uncertainty. The desire mind wants to seek some place of certainty, something to plant your feet on and rely on. But wisdom says, no, there's no such thing. The trick is to become at ease with insecurity. I think one of the most useful, uh, simple teachings at this time is Ajahn Chah's phrase, "Mane." It's a Thai phrase that's, you take this epidemic now, people want to know um, how long is it going to last? When am I going to be able to go back to work? When can I travel? What's my chances of catching it? And the only really um, skillful or completely honest answer is my net. Who knows? Just deal with it as a moment by moment. Truth is, we don't know anything, even without this epidemic. This is sort of brings it into focus. But we don't know if we're going to be alive tomorrow. We don't know uh, what's going to happen. It's all uncertain, and the skill is to be at ease with that. So it's a bit of a roundabout digression from where I started with the point about the world being empty. But it's not separate from that. It's seeing uncertainty, seeing conditionality, seeing impermanence are all ways of approaching the most fundamental teaching of emptiness. Then the third clause in the Buddhist statement was to Mogaraja was abandon thoughts of self. And this is the anatta teaching, which is the personal, internal, or subjective aspect of the general principle of emptiness. Everything is, as we said, is void. Everything is conditioned. Nothing has its own existence, independent existence. Nothing has a svabhava, and own essence. Nothing exists from its own side. This also applies to uh, what you think of as yourself, as me and mine. That's just a concept. It's not a fundamental existential or ontological reality. It's just a convenient shorthand without any basis. Seeing things as empty includes seeing yourself as empty. And this is very liberating. This is the magic bullet or the key to unlock many, many aspects and eventually to free oneself is to seeing the emptiness of self. When there's no when it's seen there is no self, then there's no fear, there's no anxiety, there's no point of conflict. There's no me, no mine. What is there to fear? What is there to lose? It's just this present moment. It's just phenomena. This conditionality. there are uh, two approaches to an understanding of the idea of anatta. One is what we could call the analytical approach, which is taking a close examination of body and mind and breaking it down into its finer and finer components and not finding anywhere itself. So in the components down into long lists of finer and finer components. In nowhere in this analysis do you find a actual self. A very classic metaphor, metaphorical illustration of this is in the questions of King Melinda and the simile of Melinda's chariot. Melinda was a Greek king from Bactria, so a man educated in Greek philosophy, and he was in discourse with the Buddhist monk Nagasena. A very interesting text of Questions of King Melinda because it's a very early interface interaction between West and East. And Melinda was asking Nagasena about the Buddhist teaching of not self, which she found puzzling and difficult, as many people do on first approach. And as a repeated theme in that book, after some kind of intellectual level discussion, Nagasena will say, or Melinda, the king, Melinda will say, give a simile. Give a simile, O monk. And Nagasena would come up with some simile to illustrate the point. And in this case, he gave the simile of the chariot. He asked Melinda, King, how did you get here today to this discussion? He said, well, I came in my chariot. Well, okay. If we were to take this chariot and break it up into pieces and throw the one wheel over here and one wheel over there and the axle there and the backboard there and the yoke there and so on, in the end, could you show me amongst all those pieces, could you find for me the essence of chariot? And then there followed back and forth some Socratic type of dialogue of question and answer. And finally, Melinda comes around to say, well, no, there's no such thing as essence of chariot. The name chariot is just a designation we give to this pile of parts and pieces. When they're arranged properly, then we can call it a chariot. And the monk Nagasena, he said, so it is, sir, with the human body-mind system. There is no essence of Nagasena. There is no essence of Melinda. There is just body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. And nowhere in these various factors can you find an essence. You could update this analogy to what I call Melinda's Chevrolet, and to illustrate the point that the idea of a self is actually a useless, redundant, and mentally lazy, philosophically lazy idea. It doesn't really explain anything. It's not necessary. Let's say in this analogy, let's say there's a fellow named Nagasena who's just, there's a fellow named Melinda who's just bought himself a new car. And he's so happy and proud of it. But he doesn't know he's a bit of a dunderhead. And he doesn't know the first thing about how cars work. And his friend Nagasena is a Class A mechanic. And he's showing him this new car, and Melinda says, "It runs really good. It works really great. And I figured out how there's a green goblin that lives under the hood that makes everything go." And Melinda just laughs at that. That's stupid. How can you say there's a green goblin under the hood? Well, what makes the wheels turn around? Well, that's the crankshaft turning that through the transmission. It turns the axle, turns the wheels. Okay, well, the green goblin turning the crankshaft around. No, 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 no. That's the pistons are driving up and down, and the rods are driving the crankshaft. Well, must be the green goblin that makes uh, the rods go up and down inside the piston. No, 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 no. That's the spark plug is exploding the gas. And you can go right back to the whole working of the car, the carburetor and distributor. Melinda can keep falling back on, well, it has to be the Green Goblin does this. He has to make the spark. He has to run the distributor cap. No, 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 no. So in the end, the Green Goblin then has to be abandoned because it's useless. It doesn't actually explain anything. It's only a convenient explanatory uh, fable when you don't really know how things work. So if we're going to be Class A mechanics of our own organism and we practice Vipassana meditation, we look inside the workings of the body mind system and examine it, we can see how everything works without any need for inserting a self. The idea that there's a self doing anything becomes redundant. There's only objects and consciousness knowing objects, and they're empty both sides. There's the object and the knowing of the object, and no third besides. And there doesn't need to be any third. It doesn't do anything. You don't see any. There doesn't seem to be any point of it. So if you understand that, then you're approaching emptiness. In the Indian philosophical context, another aspect of this, which is I think is always important to understand the teachings of the Buddha in the context of his own time, and uh, not to fall into the temptation of um, seeing it in the context of modern psychological theory or whatever. He was living and teaching in a specific milieu that was very philosophically mature and profound. And the prevailing thought in India at the time was that there was, in the human being, there was something called Atman. That's a Sanskrit word. The Pali would be Atta, which is the self or the soul, or is an abiding, unchanging principle. And there was a philosophical advance on this in the Upanishads, which was probably the most profound teachings before the Buddha, where the idea of an individual Atman was replaced with the idea that Atman is Brahma. which means that there's one universal consciousness, and what's experienced as individual consciousnesses, individual beings, are just that one mind, that one universal consciousness, as it were, looking out different windows. And that was a major philosophical advance from the way people thought previously. But the Buddha transcended that. He took the Upanishads took it from many to one, and the Buddha took it from one to zero. He said it isn't really completely accurate. There's some truth to it, but it isn't completely accurate to talk in terms of one mind. It's more accurate to talk in terms of no mind or empty mind. It's voidness. It's difficult for us to grasp that for several reasons. One important reason, I think, is limitations of our language. Our thought is structured around our language. And it's unavoidable that we have to use a noun to talk about mind or consciousness, even in languages like Pali, we have chitta, vijnana. These are nouns. So when we hear something described with a noun, we implicitly assume it's referring to something, no matter how ephemeral. There's something that we're referencing. But it's not actually true. The process of mind, of consciousness, awareness, chitta, is better really thought of as a verb. It's a knowing without a knower. There is knowing. There is being conscious, but there's really no thing you can pin down and say this is consciousness. And the objects too, the world, local or the dhammas, they're also empty. They're without self-substance. So it's empty both ways. And seeing things in this way, if we can really penetrate the truths of emptiness and anatta, that is tremendously liberating. It's really freeing the mind from the limitations, this little box of me and mine, opening things wide up, and anything is possible, up to and including the realization of the unconditioned, which is transcending birth and death. Unborn, that which is unchanging, that which is undying, because if there were not, then there would be no escape from the born, the changing, the dying, the udana. And the Pali, the English loses a little bit of the flavor of the Pali because of the qualities of nibbana as being, for example, undying, is amata, is not at all the same thing as saying everlasting or immortal. Because then that would be something persisting, carrying forward in time, would be a something. It's saying because something is not born, it doesn't die, it's outside of that rubric altogether. These concepts just don't apply. They apply to the conditioned. They do not apply to the unconditioned. So I think I'll stop there since there's a few people here, and I'm happy to stay on for a while longer. If anybody has questions, just type them into the chat, and I'll do my best to answer them. Oh, okay. Sorry. I just getting used to this software. This is pretty new to me. I just turned the chat window on. I didn't see it before. Okay. There's one question here is of a practical nature. I'm thinking of ordaining, but I have a lot of credit card debt. Can someone ordain with debt, or is it an absolute requirement to pay it off before ordaining? Um, yeah, that's unfortunate. It is, Vinia, that you have to be clear of debt to ordain. Um, but that would also include if you can be legally clear of your debt by declaring bankruptcy. That would also be acceptable. Do you believe the reaction to jumping? Sorry, jumping on me. Brian Rue is asking. I don't know. It seems to be very serious. Um, it doesn't look to be as serious as say the Spanish flu of 1918, but it looks serious enough to be concerned. Um, I think we have to some degree rest in the uncertainty of it. Anthea, could you describe some way to establish and maintain equanimity through this? Um, yeah, I think that's a very important quality that we need is to maintain equanimity, upeka, and I think a good part of that is, and I touched on this earlier in my talk, is fully accepting uncertainty that we don't know. Uh, you use common sense and wisdom to protect yourself as best you can, but you remain uh, try to remain comfortable with first of all the idea that you are going to die. That's something if you haven't worked with Marnasat, if you haven't come to terms with the fact that you're going to die, I think then when something like this comes along, you're going to freak out a lot more than someone who's come to terms with their own mortality beforehand. And this may be a, a positive silver lining to the whole thing. If more people are brought to accept their mortality, to see, yeah, it is all impermanent. I'm not going to be able to maintain this state of existence forever. So if you're already comfortable with the fact of your death, you're going to have more equanimity to start with, and to also to be comfortable with the idea of uncertainty, of not knowing. You don't know uh, how long it's going to last. You don't know um, if all the numbers we're getting from different countries are true or accurate. There's a lot we don't know, and instead of craving certainty, just learn to be comfortable with uncertainty. Things are as they are. Okay, I'm sorry. There's a couple of people made comments early on that might have been helpful if I'd seen them about the audio, but I didn't realize I had to turn the chat on until just a moment ago, so I didn't see them. Okay, here's another question. There's an object and the knowing of the object. There's no mind. There's a knowing. Does this mean the object and the knowing of it are the same thing? object knowing itself? Um, yeah, that's a kind of a deep question. I don't think there's a one simple easy answer to that. The way I tend to think of it is that the subject object separation or duality is the fundamental duality, and it's the last to go. And really, it's only in the state of nibbana or the unconditioned that it's completely absent, that it makes no sense whatsoever to speak of a difference between subject and object. Prior to that point, yeah, there is a difference. There's a knowing of the object and there's the object. Whether on some deeper metaphysical level is the same thing or not is sort of a moot point. It's a very probably impossible question to even fully know the answer to. Yeah, I kind of have that feelings similar to that, but then that's a political question and it's sort of outside my pay grade. I'm not, I'm glad I'm not in government trying to make these tough choices and decisions. Um, and this is when this virus passes away, that's going to be the next thing we're all going to have to deal with is probably an economic depression. If this lasts long enough, but then that's more mania. That's something else you have to deal with. Would it be right to say that we operate only with the conditioned, or within the condition? Yes, yeah, that's true because it's only acting within the conditioned is all action, all thought, all speech. In the unconditioned, there's no conditionality, so there's no action, speech, or thought. So it's completely outside of that domain. So everything we do and touch and think and feel and operate in our life is within that condition. Is it ignorance that separates or creates the duality of an object and knowing of the object? Um, I guess that would be one way of expressing it. Ignorance is uh, underlying causality of the entire cosmos in one way. One way of saying it. The whole universe is a mistake because we're ignorant. It's it's a manifestation of any. Are the monasteries and monks here in Canada getting support they need during this time? Yes, it seems like we're, in the material sense, we're okay. I think the biggest uh, practical difficulty we'll have going forward is uh, personnel because of the limit of traveling and people not being able to come and roll. That's going to be so far. That's not really impacted us, but I can see that will be going forward. Yeah, yeah. This is brand new for me. I've not done this video format before. Yeah. Although we may be able to get our mind around emptiness intellectually, this seems to be quite different realizing the wisdom of emptiness. Yes, that's true. That is. exactly right. Um, level is not possible before stream entry. However, it can be approached with the intellect, and that makes the transition into stream entry easier the closer you can approach the idea, the concept. You can get very close to it. You can have glimpses of it. Um, it's like a mathematical asymptote, right? You have a, if you have a certain functions you can graph that um, approach closer and closer to zero without ever reaching it. So if you draw it on a graph on the y-axis, you'll have a almost vertical line beside the y-axis that doesn't never quite touch it. This is like the mind, the intellectual thinking mind can approach this concept of emptiness and is breaking things down into fine components and not finding an essence. The other one is conditionality, which I also touched upon, is looking and contemplating, thinking, and understanding about the dependent nature of things, the dependent origination, conditionality, and seeing how nothing exists as a self entity. Right? So one approach is going finer grain into reality, and the other one is seeing things in a relational aspect and sort of expanding the vision outwards and not finding any point that you can take as being independent, independently existing. Okay, it's been on about an hour, and it seems like nobody's asking any more questions. So unless there's any last minute questions someone has, I'll end the stream. Thank you very much, and we'll continue with. I'll continue doing this every Wednesday at this time, unless we find out that this time is not convenient for people. They prefer a different time, and I'd be also willing to change it. Okay, here's what most being empty, implying that time is empty, even the present moment relative. Yeah, well, certainly time is empty. Time is sort of a different ways of approaching that. There's the Sarvastivada idea that past, present, and future all exist. Meaning, time's an illusion. It's just our consciousness notices moments in a sequence picked out of the space-time fourth dimensional continuum. That's the Sarvastivada view. There's a Tibetan teaching about the yoga of the three times. The past is unreal because it has ceased to exist. The future is unreal because it is not manifest. And the present is unreal because it cannot be fixed. Meaning there's no present moment as an infinitesimal, like a mathematical infinitesimal, this moment ends up being empty because you can't put your mind on it. It's already in the past by the time you're aware of it. So then it's all empty in that way. Okay, so I think I'll sign out. Thank you all very much for coming. I enjoyed this, and we'll try again next week. Bye now.